The telephone rang at 3:30 in the morning. Kenyatta Pryor shuddered and reluctantly got out from under the blanket. Calls at this hour were never good news, especially when your husband hadn't been home in 3 days. "Hello," she answered hoarsely, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Mrs. Pryor?" The man's voice sounded formal. "This is Officer Washington of the Riverton Police Department. I need you to come to the city morgue." Kenyatta felt her heart skip a beat. "What's going on?" "The body of a man who may be your husband was found. We need an identification. Do you have a chance to come now?" She sank to the edge of the bed, feeling the room begin to spin. "Yes, I'll be there. Give me 40 minutes." Hanging up the phone, Kenyatta sat motionless, trying to comprehend what she had heard. The body, the morgue, identification. The words echoed in her head, but her mind refused to accept them. 3 days ago, Terrence had slammed the door after another argument. Now, as she dressed with trembling hands, Kenyatta involuntarily thought back to that night. "Did you lose again?" She held up a blank bank card. "Terrence, it was almost $700, our last money." Terrence stood leaning against the kitchen counter with a guilty look, but there was irritation in his eyes. "I'll get it back, I have a plan. A guy suggested—" "What plan?" Kenyatta interrupted him. "Every time you have a new plan, and we're living worse and worse. I'm tired, you know? Tired of working 2 jobs while you're wasting it all in those gambling dens of yours." Terrence's face darkened. "Don't start that again. I said I'll pay you back." "How? You gonna borrow from that creep Otis again? You know what he does to debtors?" "I'll take care of it." He grabbed his jacket off the rack. "Stop badgering me every time." "If you leave now, you don't have to come back," Kenyatta shouted in a fit of rage. Terrence stopped in the doorway, turned around with a cold look. "Maybe it's better for both of us." The door slammed, and that was the last time she saw her husband. Until today. Kenyatta parked her tattered Ford in the parking lot of the city morgue. The building looked cold and uninviting, even on a warm summer night. Officer Washington, a large policeman with tired eyes, met her at the entrance. "Mrs. Pryor, come with me." They walked down the long, sterile hallway, and with each step, Kenyatta's legs grew heavier. Kenyatta had worked as a hospital nurse and had been in the morgue, but it was one thing to clean a room, and quite another to go and identify her own husband. "I must warn you," the officer said, stopping in front of the door with the identification sign. "The body is badly damaged. The face, not in the best condition. We found him in an abandoned building on the outskirts. Looks like a showdown over debts." Kenyatta nodded, pressing her lips together. The room smelled of formalin and death. Behind the glass, a body lay on a metal table, covered with a sheet. The pathologist and another man in a suit stood nearby, a tall, lean man with shrewd eyes. "This is Detective Laurel Bratton," the officer introduced him. "He's in charge of the investigation." The detective nodded briefly. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Pryor. We'll do everything we can to find those responsible." "I don't know if it's my loss yet," Kenyatta replied quietly. The pathologist pulled back the sheet, and Kenyatta recoiled involuntarily. The man's face was almost unrecognizable from the multiple blows. But even through the gruesome mask of death, she recognized the chin with the distinctive scar that Terrence had received as a child. "Can I see his right hand?" she asked in a trembling voice. The pathologist pulled the sheet further back, exposing the tattooed arm, the initials T and K, intertwined inside the outline of a heart. The same tattoo Terrence had gotten on their 5th anniversary. The room swam before Kenyatta's eyes. "That's him. That's my husband," she whispered, grabbing the wall for support. Officer Washington took her under the elbow and helped her into a chair. "Do you need water, or should I call a doctor?" Kenyatta shook her head. What happened to him?" Detective Bratton exchanged a glance with the pathologist. Apparently, he'd been beaten to death, presumably debt-related. He had no ID, no phone, just a couple of dollars in his pocket. But there was this picture. Bratton held out a plastic evidence bag to her. Inside was a tattered photograph of Kenyatta and Terrence smiling, embracing against a lake. Their last vacation 3 years ago. "Did your husband have a gambling problem?" the detective asked. "Yes," Kenyatta answered quietly. "He owed a lot of people. One man in particular, Otis Talley. He runs an underground casino on the east side. Bratton wrote something down in his notebook. When was the last time you saw your husband? 3 days ago. We had a fight about money. He left and never came back. After the paperwork, Detective Bratton offered Kenyatta a ride home, but she declined. She needed to be alone to process what had happened. Sitting behind the wheel of her car, Kenyatta could not bring herself to turn the ignition key. Instead, she stared blankly at the lighted entrance of the morgue and tried to understand how grief felt, undoubtedly. But there was also some strange desolation, as if a part of her had been waiting for this finale. Terrence was not always like this. When they met 15 years ago, he was working as a mechanic in an automobile repair shop, dreaming of opening his own business. He was cheerful, energetic, full of plans. They planned a modest wedding. Neither he nor she had rich relatives. The first years were happy, despite the financial difficulties, and then Terrence began to play. At first, it was innocent poker nights with friends. Then the stakes began to grow, and 5 years ago, he first lost their entire monthly salary. Kenyatta still remembered his promises that it wouldn't happen again. She remembered her tears and his vows to quit, and how a month later, it started all over again. The house greeted her with an oppressive silence. Kenyatta mechanically turned on the light, went into the kitchen, put on the kettle. It wasn't until she sat down at the table with a cup of tea that reality finally hit her. Terrence was gone. Never would be. Not his laughter, not his voice, not the warmth of his body next to her at night. Even with all their problems, he was a part of her life, a part of herself. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and Kenyatta didn't try to hold them back. She cried for lost years, for unfulfilled dreams, for the life they could have had if not for his gambling addiction. The doorbell rang close to noon. Kenyatta, exhausted from a sleepless night, eyes swollen with tears, opened the door and saw Shanquita Merriweather, her best friend since high school. "Oh, honey," Shanquita hugged her. "I just found out. It's terrible." Kenyatta let herself melt into her friend's embrace, finding strange comfort in the human warmth. "Come in," she said, pulling away. Shanquita walked into the house, carrying a bag of food. "I brought dinner. I'm sure you weren't even thinking about food." They sat in the kitchen and Shanquita talked about how good Terrence was despite his problems, about how she would always be there for Kenyatta, about how she needed to hang in there. But something about her friend's behavior seemed odd. She avoided a direct gaze, glanced at her watch often, and her fingers nervously thumbed over her napkin. "Did you know he was having trouble with Otis?" Kenyatta asked. Shanquita froze for a moment. "What? Oh, yes. He would sometimes come to the bar where I work. I heard them talking. Otis threatened to, Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't want to scare you," Shanquita answered quickly. "Terrence asked me not to tell. He was hoping to work things out." Something in her tone made Kenyatta wary. "When was the last time you saw him?" "Terrence?" Shanquita looked away. "I don't remember exactly. Maybe a week ago?" "He came into the bar after work." Kenyatta was about to ask something else, but Shanquita stood up abruptly. "I gotta go. I have a shift in an hour. But I'll stop by tomorrow, okay?" She hugged Kenyatta again. "Hang in there, friend. We'll get through this together." After Shanquita left, Kenyatta sat in silence for a long time. A strange uneasiness never left her. Something in her friend's story didn't add up, but fatigue prevented her from thinking clearly. The rest of the day passed like a blur. Kenyatta called work to take time off, contacted the funeral home, began calling the few relatives she could find. The mechanical actions helped keep her from thinking about what awaited her tomorrow. The empty house, the lonely evenings, the bills she would now have to pay herself, and the debts Terrence would probably incur. In the evening, a call came from Detective Bratton. He reported that the police had questioned several patrons of Otis's establishment, and there were witnesses who had seen Terrence leave the casino the night he disappeared, accompanied by 2 large men. "We will find them, Mrs. Pryor," the detective assured him. "Justice would be served." Kenyatta thanked him and hung up. Justice. What does it matter now? It wouldn't bring Terrence back. It wouldn't bring back the years they could have lived together. When darkness fell, Kenyatta finally got into bed. The pillow next to her, the one Terrence usually slept on, was untouched. She turned toward it, breathed in the faint scent of his cologne that still lingered on the pillowcase, and let herself cry once more. Sleep came suddenly, in the midst of the tears. A restless, nightmare-filled dream where Terrence was calling to her from somewhere far away and she couldn't get through to him. A knock on the door snapped her out of her slumber. Kenyatta opened her eyes and glanced at the clock 2 o'clock in the morning. Who could have come at this hour? A detective with news? Or one of Otis's men coming to claim Terrence's debts? The knock came again, more insistent. Kenyatta got up, put on her robe. In the hallway, she froze for a moment at the door. "Who is it?" she asked, hesitating to open it. There was silence. Then a hoarse, painfully familiar voice. "It's me, Kenyatta. Open up, please." Kenyatta's heart seemed to stop. That voice. With trembling hands, she unlocked the lock, opened the door. On the threshold, haggard, with a bloodshot eye and dirty clothes, stood Terrence Pryor. Kenyatta froze in the doorway, unable to move. Her mind refused to accept what her eyes saw. Terrence, the same Terrence whose body she'd recognized in the morgue a few hours ago, was standing before her, alive, though battered. "Oh my God," she whispered, taking a step back. "This can't be happening." Terrence stepped into the house, carefully closing the door behind him. "Kenyatta, I know this looks strange, but I can explain it." "Strange?" Her voice trembled. "I was in the morgue. I saw your body. You were dead, Terrence." He held out his hands to her, but she recoiled as if from a ghost. "Don't touch me," Kenyatta whispered, feeling the ground slipping from under her feet. "Am I going crazy? Is this some kind of horrible dream?" Terrence looked exhausted. His right cheekbone was swollen, there was a fresh abrasion on his forehead, and his clothes were dirty and wrinkled, as if he'd spent days on the street. "It's really me," he said quietly. "Can I at least sit down? I can barely stand." Kenyatta silently pointed to the couch in the living room, still not believing her eyes. Terrence sank heavily onto the edge, writhing in pain. She remained standing, leaning against the door jamb, as if afraid to come closer. "I don't understand," she said at last. "How is this possible?" Terrence took a deep breath. "Otis's men had tracked me down 3 days ago after our fight. I was at the bar trying to figure out how to get money, and then they came up, 2 big guys. Said Otis wanted to talk. I knew what that meant." He paused, rubbing his bruised cheekbone. "They took me to some abandoned warehouse. Otis was furious, said his patience had run out. They started beating me." Kenyatta involuntarily pressed her palm to her mouth, visualizing the scene. "I thought I was going to die in there," Terrence continued. "But by some miracle, I managed to escape when they were distracted by the bell. I jumped out the window, running like a madman. I thought they were going to chase me, so I hid. I couldn't go home. I was afraid they'd find me here and hurt you too." "But the body..." Kenyatta shook her head. "I saw the body with your tattoo in your clothes." Terrence frowned. "I don't know what kind of body it was. Maybe they found someone similar, to scare the other debtors, to show what happens to people who don't pay." There was sincerity in his voice, but something about the story seemed wrong to Kenyatta. She walked slowly to the couch, gazing into her husband's face. "Where have you been all these days?" "Hiding in an abandoned house behind the railroad tracks. Only came out at night to find food. Today, I finally decided to come home. I had to make sure you were all right." Kenyatta cautiously sat down next to him, still keeping his distance. "Why didn't you go to the police?" Terrence grinned bitterly. "With my reputation? With my debts? Who would have believed me? They'd think I'd gotten myself into trouble." He reached out and touched her fingers. This time, Kenyatta didn't pull away, though her whole body tensed at the touch. "I know I've caused you a lot of pain," Terrence said quietly. "But I swear I'll change. This experience, thinking you're gonna die, it changes a man, you know? I'll never play again. I'll get a real job. Everything will be different." Kenyatta looked at him, not knowing what to feel. Relief that he was alive, anger at the horror he had endured, disbelief at his promises, which she'd heard dozens of times before. You need to go to the police, she said firmly. I've already spoken to a detective. They're looking for whoever it was in the morgue. Terrence grimaced. I can't. Otis will find a way to get to me even in prison. We need to get out of here, make a fresh start. Leave? Kenyatta shook her head. Where? We don't have any money. I have some savings, Terrence answered quickly. Yeah, save a little bit at a time. Kenyatta looked at him incredulously. In all the years of their marriage, Terrence had never saved a dime. Any spare money went to his gambling addiction. Kenyatta's phone rang, interrupting her musings. She glanced at the screen detective Bratton. Hello? She answered quietly, glancing toward the living room. Mrs. Pryor, sorry for the late call. The detective's voice sounded strained. I have some new information. We've received the preliminary results of the body's blood work. The type doesn't match your husband's medical records. Kenyatta felt her heart quicken its rhythm. What does that mean? It could mean a mistake in the paperwork, but... The detective paused. Mrs. Pryor, are you sure the man you identified is really your husband? Kenyatta swallowed, looking out into the living room where Terrence sat with his head bowed on his hands. Yeah, I don't know, Detective Bratton, my husband just got home. Silence on the other end of the line. Say again, please. Terrence is here, alive. He says he escaped from Otis's men and has been hiding all these days. Don't move from where you are. The detective's voice became harsh. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't let him out of the house. Kenyatta hung up the phone, feeling her heart pounding. She returned to the living room with 2 cups of tea. That was the detective, she said, holding out a cup to Terrence. He's on his way here. Terrence jumped to his feet. What? Why did you tell him? Because it's weird, Terrence, Kenyatta exclaimed. I recognized your body, and now you're here, alive, and your story? It doesn't make sense. Terrence walked over to her, took her by the shoulders. Kenyatta, listen to me. If I stay, Otis will find me and kill me. We have to leave. Now, I'm not going anywhere. Kenyatta released herself from his grip. The detective will be here in 20 minutes. If you're innocent, you have nothing to fear. Terrence ran his hand over his face, clearly nervous. You don't understand. Otis has connections with the police. He'll find out everything. Then explain it to me, Kenyatta demanded. Whose tattoo is on the body in the morgue? Why does he have your clothes? Where did you get your savings when you always spent every dime you had on the game? Terrence opened his mouth to answer, but at that moment the doorbell rang. Kenyatta glanced at his watch. It had only been 10 minutes. The detective couldn't have arrived that quickly. She went to the door. Who is it? It's me, Shankwita. It was my friend's voice. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about you. I thought I'd stop by and check on you. Kenyatta opened the door. Shankwita stood on the doorstep with a bottle of wine and a box of chocolates. I hope I'm not too... She stopped short when she saw Terrence behind Kenyatta's back. The bottle slipped out of her hands and shattered on the floor. Oh my God, oh my God. Shankwita's face went pale, as if she'd seen a ghost. She shifted her gaze from Terrence to Kenyatta, then back to Terrence. It's impossible, she whispered. You can't be here. Terrence looked equally shocked. Shankwita, what are you doing here? Kenyatta shifted her gaze from her husband to her friend, noticing the strange tension between them. You're both acting very strangely, she said slowly. Shankwita, you said you hadn't seen Terrence for a week. Why are you so surprised? Shankwita swayed as if she were about to faint. Yeah, I need to sit down. Outside, there was the sound of a car pulling up. Kenyatta looked out the window. Detective Bratton's black sedan pulled up in front of their house. He's here, she said. Detective Bratton didn't ring the doorbell. He knocked firmly and confidently. Kenyatta opened and he entered immediately, glancing around at those present. His penetrating eyes lingered on Terrence. Minus Mr. Pryor, I presume? Terrence nodded, straightening up as if preparing for battle. Yes, that's me. Interesting, the detective said. Considering your wife identified your body at the morgue less than 24 hours ago. It was a mistake, Terrence answered quickly. Obviously, I've been mistaken for someone else. Obviously, Bratton repeated dryly. Then he noticed Shankwita squirming in her chair. And you must be Shanquita Merriweather? I was just about to have a talk with you. Shanquita nodded nervously. I just came by to support a friend. I didn't realize Terrence was back. The detective walked slowly around the room as if studying the crime scene. Minus Mr. Pryor, can you tell us where you've been the last 3 days? Terrence repeated his story about being attacked by Otis's men, escaping, and taking refuge in an abandoned house. The detective listened attentively, occasionally making notes in his notebook. It's an interesting story, he said when Terrence had finished. Do you have any evidence of this attack? Witnesses? What witnesses? They tried to kill me. And yet you managed to escape from 2 professional thugs, Bratton said thoughtfully. Impressive. And then there's the matter of insurance, continued the detective. Mrs. Pryor, did you know that your husband had taken out a $50,000 life insurance policy about a month ago? You were named as the beneficiary. Kenyatta looked at Terrence stunned. No, I didn't know. That's a strange coincidence, isn't it? The detective looked intently at Terrence. Taking out an insurance policy and then faking your own death. Some might call it fraud. It's not! Terrence exclaimed. I took out the insurance because mechanics work is dangerous, and because I owed money to dangerous people. I wanted Kenyatta to be protected if anything happened to me. Bratton turned to Shanquita, who had been sitting silent the whole time, clenching and unclenching her fists. Minus Ms. Merriweather, did you know about the insurance? Shanquita flinched. Noomper, of course I didn't. That's odd. The detective raised an eyebrow. Because the insurance company operator says the call about the policy was made from Ruby's bar. That's your place of business, isn't it? There was a heavy silence in the room. Kenyatta felt a chill run down her spine. She looked at Shanquita, who looked like she was about to cry. The next day, Kenyatta arrived at the police station at the invitation of Detective Bratton. He met her in his office with a cup of coffee. We have an update on the case, he said. The pathologist confirmed that the body in the morgue belonged to a homeless man named Rayford Gaines. The tattoo on his arm was recent, presumably a day or 2 before his death. Kenyatta listened, clutching her coffee cup in her hands. Did that mean Terrence was telling the truth? Had someone tried to kill him? The detective tapped his fingers on the table thoughtfully. Not exactly. We checked his story. Otis Talley does claim that your husband owes him a large sum of money, but he denies sending someone to beat him up 3 days ago. According to him, Terrence disappeared before they could talk to him. Then where was he for those 3 days? Kenyatta asked. Bratton opened a file folder. We have a witness who saw your husband with Shanquita Merriweather at the Pine Grove Motel 2 days ago. They registered as a married couple. Kenyatta felt a lump come up in her throat. Terrence and Shanquita, her husband and best friend. Do you think they planned this together? She asked quietly. Everything points that way, the detective nodded. The insurance policy arranged through the bar where Shanquita works, their secret meetings. And this morning, when we searched Ms. Merriweather's apartment, we found a tattoo kit and a sketch identical to the tattoo on Gaines's body. Kenyatta sat in the interrogation room of the Riverton police station, rubbing a paper cup of long cold coffee in her hands. In the past 2 days, the world she'd known had shattered. First, she'd identified her dead husband. Then that same husband had returned alive, and now it turned out he'd been cheating on her with her best friend. And they may have killed a man together. Detective Laurel Bratton entered the room with a folder of documents in his hands, his face impassive but his eyes sympathetic. Mrs. Pryor, thank you for agreeing to come to the deposition, he said, sitting down across from her. I understand how difficult this must be for you. Kenyatta nodded, unable to find the words. What can you say in a situation like this? I want to go over some details with you if you don't mind, Bratton continued, opening the folder. When exactly did you find out about your husband's insurance policy? I didn't know about it until yesterday, Kenyatta replied. When you told me about it, Bratton made a note in his notebook. And your friend Shanquita Merriweather never mentioned it? Not even indirectly? Kenyatta shook her head. Never, although now... She hesitated, remembering. About a month ago, Shanquita asked me what I would do if I suddenly received a large sum of money. I thought it was just a conversation. But maybe she was hinting. The detective nodded, as if this information confirmed his suspicions. Mrs. Pryor, I must ask a direct question. Did you suspect an affair between your husband and Shanquita before this incident? Kenyatta felt tears coming to her eyes. Nunaptu, never. Shanquita had been my best friend since high school. She held my hand at my parents' funeral. I trusted her more than I trusted anyone. Bratton averted his eyes for a moment, giving her time to deal with her emotions. Your husband claims that the idea to fake his death came about a month ago when Otis Talley started making threats. According to him, the original plan didn't involve murder. He and Shanquita wanted to find a recently deceased homeless man and pose as Terrence. And you believe him? Kenyatta asked. We're checking all leads, the detective replied evasively. But there are inconsistencies. Shanquita claims that the idea for the staging came from Terrence, and she was just helping him. Terrence says the opposite, that Shanquita was the initiator. Kenyatta grinned bitterly, and each of them shifts the blame to the other. Exactly. But what's interesting, Bratton turned a page in his notebook, is that both deny planning the murder of Rayford Gaines. In Terrence's version, Shanquita told him she found an already dead homeless man and just tattooed him. Shanquita claims that Terrence brought Gaines to her bar already dead and forced him to help with the tattoo. What did the autopsy say? Kenyatta asked. How did this man die? Blunt force trauma to the head. Death was instantaneous. There were no signs of struggle on the body, which would indicate that the blow was sudden, perhaps from behind. Kenyatta closed her eyes, trying to comprehend the depth of the betrayal. Detective, what do I do now? She asked quietly. Bratton put down his pen for a moment, his gaze becoming more human. Go home, Mrs. Pryor. Get some rest. Take care of yourself. We'll continue our investigation and let you know the results. Back home, Kenyatta felt she could not stay within these walls. Every corner reminded her of life with Terrence, 15 years of marriage, filled with ups and downs, hopes and disappointments. And now it was all a lie. She began to pack mechanically, thinking of spending the night in a motel just to get a change of scenery, a breath of air that wasn't soaked with betrayal. Opening the bedroom closet, she reached for the suitcase on the top shelf and accidentally hit a box of old photo albums. The box fell, and a small metal container that Kenyatta had never seen before rolled out from under it. With an unsettling premonition, she opened it. Inside was a wad of cash, approximately $5,000, wrapped in a plastic bag, and 2 airline tickets in the names of Terrence Pryor and Shanquita Merriweather to Miami, dated tomorrow. Kenyatta froze, holding the tickets in her hands. This find confirmed everything the detective had said. Terrence and Shanquita had indeed planned to run away together, leaving her alone with false grief and possibly with the police on her tail if the insurance fraud was uncovered. Gathering the evidence in a bag, Kenyatta called Detective Bratton. He listened to her and promised to be there in an hour to pick up what she'd found. Hanging up the phone, Kenyatta found a second call from Shanquita. Her finger hovered over the answer button. Part of her wanted to immediately say what she thought of her former friend, but the other part, the part that still couldn't believe what had happened, demanded an explanation. She replied, Kenyatta, thank God! Shanquita's voice sounded excited. I have bailed you out. I need to talk to you. Can I come over? Why? Kenyatta asked coldly. Because you need to know the truth, not the version Terrence is telling you. Kenyatta thought about the tickets and the money she'd found, about the detective who would be here in an hour. Okay, she said finally. Come on over. After hanging up the phone, Kenyatta put the evidence she had found on the coffee table in the living room. Let Shanquita see that her plan had been discovered. Shanquita arrived 20 minutes later. She looked haggard, eyes reddened, hair in disarray, clothes wrinkled. Not at all like the confident woman Kenyatta had known her to be all these years. Thank you for agreeing to meet, Shanquita said as she crossed the threshold. Her gaze immediately fell on the tickets and money on the table, and she froze. You found it. Yes, Kenyatta crossed her arms across her chest. So don't bother making up stories. I know you and Terrence were planning to run away together. Shanquita sank down onto the couch, as if her legs were no longer holding her up. It's not as easy as it looks, Kenyatta. Isn't it? Kenyatta didn't try to hide the bitterness in her voice. I think it's very clear. My husband and my best friend had an affair, decided to fake his death, get the insurance and run away together. And to do that, They killed an innocent man. I didn't kill him, Shanquita exclaimed. It was Terrence. He brought Gaines to the bar after closing time, already dead. Said he'd found a homeless guy who'd OD'd, and this was our chance. I just got a tattoo. She covered her face with her hands. God, that sounds awful. I know it does. And why should I believe you? Kenyatta asked. After everything you've done? Shanquita raised her eyes full of tears. Because I loved him, Kenyatta. So much so that I lost my head. He said he was unhappy with you, that you didn't understand him, that we were made for each other. I know that's no excuse, but how long ago did it start? Kenyatta interrupted her. Shanquita lowered her gaze. About a year ago, he used to come to the bar a lot when he was losing. We'd talk, just as friends at first. Then, it changed. A whole year they lied to her, meeting behind her back, laughing at her, planning a future that didn't include her. And you never once thought of me? Kenyatta asked quietly. That I thought of you as a sister? I did, Shanquita whispered. Every day. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't stop. And Rayford Gaines? That homeless guy? Did you think of him when you tattooed him? Shanquita shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. Terrence said he was already dead, that we weren't hurting anyone, just using a body that no one would recognize anyway. But the detective said he died from a blow to the head. I didn't know, Shanquita exclaimed. I swear to you. Terrence came to my bar after closing time, said he'd found the right body. I didn't even ask for details. Didn't want to know. Kenyatta stared at her friend, trying to figure out if she was telling the truth. But how could she believe a man who had lied to her for a year? Why did you come to my house yesterday? Kenyatta asked. You knew Terrence was alive, didn't you? Shanquita nodded. I did. He was supposed to stay in hiding until the day of the flight. We planned for you to get insurance, and we'd be long gone by then. I came to check on you and say goodbye, I guess. I didn't think he'd come here. Why did he come? Shanquita grinned bitterly. He said he was worried about you, that he couldn't do that to you, that he loved you. She raised her gaze to Kenyatta. He's been using me, you know, all this time. I thought we were going to start a new life together, and he decided at the last minute to come back to you. There was such pain in her voice that Kenyatta almost believed her. But then she remembered the surprise on Terrence's face when he saw Shanquita in their house. It wasn't like the reaction of a man who had just betrayed his mistress for his wife. You're lying, Kenyatta said slowly. Terrence didn't know you were coming yesterday. He was shocked to see you. Shanquita froze, her eyes narrowing. What did he tell you? That it was all my idea? That he was innocent? He didn't have time to say anything. The detective arrived, Kenyatta replied. But now I see you're both lying. Each is trying to make the other look guilty. Shanquita stood up. Her face suddenly changed. Her tears dried up. Her gaze became hard. You know what the funny thing is? I was really worried about you. Even when Terrence and I were planning all of this, I insisted that we put the insurance in your name, so you'd have money to start a new life. She took a step toward Kenyatta. And now it's ruined. Terrence is in jail. I'm on bail. The life we planned will never happen, and it's all because of you. Kenyatta stepped back, feeling suddenly threatened. Because of me? You're the one who killed a man and tried to trick me. We could have just disappeared, Shanquita exclaimed, her voice rising to a shout. You would have gotten the money. We would have gotten our freedom. Everyone would have been happy. But no, Terrence decided to play the hero, to come back to you. She grabbed a heavy glass ashtray off the table. And now I got nothing to lose, you know? I'm already charged with murder. What difference would one more make? Kenyatta felt her heart quicken with fear. Shanquita, put that down. Detective Bratton will be here soon. In an hour, you said. Shanquita shook her head. A lot can happen in an hour. An accident. You were so upset about your husband's betrayal that you didn't watch your step, fell down the stairs. She took another step forward. Kenyatta retreated toward the kitchen, thinking feverishly. There was a bread knife on the table, but it had yet to be reached. You won't do it, Kenyatta said, trying to buy time. We've known each other all our lives. So? Shanquita asked bitterly. That didn't stop me from stealing your husband. Didn't stop me from planning an escape. She swung the ashtray. Kenyatta bounced, turned, and rushed into the kitchen. Grabbing the knife, she turned around, holding it in front of her. "Stay back!" Shanquita stopped in the doorway, her eyes glistening with rage and tears. "You can't stop me, Kenyatta. You've always been weaker, always needed protection. First your parents, then me, then Terrence. But you know what? None of us really cared about you. We just put up with you." The words hit harder than any physical assault. Kenyatta felt her knife hand shake. "That's not true." "It is true." Shanquita took another step. "Terrence told me how sick he was of your naivety, your blind faith in him, despite all his failures. It was pathetic, he'd said." Kenyatta shook her head, trying not to listen to those poisonous words. But part of her believed them, the part that had always doubted herself, always thought herself unworthy of love. Taking advantage of her confusion, Shanquita lunged forward. Kenyatta instinctively held out her knife, but Shanquita struck her in the arm with the ashtray. The ashtray fell to the floor with a clang. The next blow struck Kenyatta in the temple. She staggered, her eyes darkening. Another blow knocked her to the ground. Lying on the floor, half stunned, Kenyatta saw Shanquita lift the ashtray for the final blow, and that's when the front door burst open with a crash. "Police! Drop your weapons!" Detective Bratton stood in the doorway, his gun pointed at Shanquita. Behind him, 2 more police officers could be seen. Shanquita froze with her ashtray raised, her face contorted with impotent rage. Then she slowly lowered her hand and produced her improvised weapon. "She attacked me," Shanquita said, instantly changing tactics. "I was defending myself." "Interesting," Bratton remarked dryly, nodding to one of the officers who immediately walked over to Shanquita and handcuffed her. "Because we heard most of your conversation, including the threats and the confession of accessory to murder." He walked over to Kenyatta, helping her up. "Are you all right, Mrs. Pryor?" Kenyatta touched her temple, blood on her fingers. "I'll live," she said quietly. "The medics are on their way," the detective said. "And Ms. Merriweather will go back behind bars, this time without the possibility of bail." Shanquita threw one last hate-filled look at Kenyatta before she was led out of the house. "We arrived early," Bratton explained as he sat Kenyatta down in a chair. "Something in your voice made me worry. It's a good thing we were in a hurry." Kenyatta nodded, still stunned by what had happened. "And Terrence?" she asked at last. "What did he say?" Bratton sighed. "He confessed to conspiracy to commit insurance fraud but continues to deny murder. Claims Shanquita told him she found a suitable body and he didn't ask for details." "Do you believe him?" "We have no direct evidence of his involvement in the murder," the detective admitted. "But at the very least, he's an accessory to fraud and concealing evidence. He's looking at 5 to 10 years. 6 months later, Kenyatta stood in front of the visitor's window at the county jail. Across from him sat Terrence, gaunt and aged from those months of incarceration. "Thanks for coming," he said, looking at her through the glass. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "Neither was I," Kenyatta answered honestly. Shanquita's trial ended a week ago. She was found guilty of murdering Rayford Gaines and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Terrence got 8 years for accessory to fraud and concealing evidence, with the possibility of parole in 5. "How are you doing?" Terrence asked. "You're looking good." Kenyatta smiled weakly. "Better than before. I sold the house. Too many memories. I moved to a new neighborhood, got a new job, I'm starting over." Terrence nodded. "You deserve that. You deserve to be happy." They were silent for a moment, looking at each other through the glass that separated them not only physically, but emotionally. "Why did you come back then?" Kenyatta finally asked. "When you could have just flown away with her." Terrence lowered his gaze to his hands. "I couldn't do that to you. I couldn't leave you thinking I was dead. No matter what happened between us, no matter how wrong I was, you didn't deserve to be hurt like this." "And Shanquita, did you love her?" He paused, then shrugged. "I thought I did. She was different, exciting, dangerous. But when I saw what she was capable of, when she brought that homeless man's body, I realized I'd made a terrible mistake." "Did you know she killed him?" "Not right away," Terrence admitted. "She said she found him already dead. I believed her. But then, she blurted it out. Said something about how easy he was to die, one blow, and that was it. I realized what she'd done, but it was too late to back out. Kenyatta studied his face, trying to see if he was telling the truth. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," she said finally. "For lying, for cheating, for everything." Terrence nodded. "I understand, and I'm not apologizing. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry about everything, and I'm glad you've moved on." Kenyatta stood up, feeling strangely relieved. It was as if the weight she'd been carrying all these months had lessened a little. "Goodbye, Terrence," she said quietly. "Goodbye, Kenyatta," he replied. "Be happy." Stepping out of the prison into the bright spring sunshine, Kenyatta inhaled deeply. There was a new life ahead of her. Without lies, without betrayal, without the constant fear of creditors or police calls. A life she would build on her own terms. She didn't know if she would ever be able to trust people again the way she used to. She didn't know if she could forgive Terrence or even understand his motives. But she knew one thing. She had survived. Survived the betrayal of the two people closest to her and became stronger. Getting into her car, Kenyatta took one last look at the gray prison building, then resolutely turned the key in the ignition. It was time to move on.